Another way you may need to transform your data is by transposing your data. So sometimes as a data analyst, you're given data that's already been pivoted into a wide format, where all of your data is given a row, column, and value. And that can be difficult to work with sometimes because you might want to break that down back into its original records where you have one record per row instead. A pivoted representation is wider and more compact and useful for reporting and conveying data, but if you need to reconstruct that data and create a new analysis from it, you might need to transpose that data to get back at the original rows. So let's take a look at an example here. Here we're going back to the example of my online course website, Sundog Education, and we're going to take a look at quarterly enrollments per course here on the site. So this is a data set that's already been pivoted, where I have each course on each row, and then I have individual columns for each quarter, and finally a total column at the end that adds them all up for the entire fiscal year. So this might be a useful way for reporting information, but if I need to analyze that data in some different way, I probably want to get that back into its original form, where I have individual rows for each individual quarter's information, instead of adding them up this way. So instead of having an entire row for all of the recommender systems data for each quarter, I might want a row for recommender systems Q1 sales, recommender systems Q2 sales, recommender systems Q3 sales, et cetera, et cetera. So kind of deconstructing this back into its original form of individual records is what the exam calls transposing. Now, technically transposing, that word means just swapping the rows and columns, and that's not what we're doing here. We're not just flipping this on its side and saying that we're going to make the quarters the rows and the course names the columns. Rather, we're going to split this out so every cell becomes its own record, ignoring the total column on the side. We're going to discard that for our purposes. So how do you do that? Well, a more accurate way of describing this operation is unpivoting. So what we're looking at here is pivoted data. We want to unpivot that data. And in a lot of tools like Microsoft Excel, there is an unpivot command you can use to do that very easily. So let's move on to our next diagram here. We can see this is the end result of what we're doing. So we have our original pivoted data at the top there, and at the bottom we have our unpivoted transposed data instead, where again, we've just split out each cell into its own record. We have Q1 recommender systems, we have Q2 recommender systems, Q3 recommender systems, all in their individual rows there. So this is what the exam calls transposing data. You could also call it unpivoting data, which I think is a little bit more precise, but that is the general idea. We're taking pivoted data, breaking it back down into its original data set rows. That's what they call transposing data in this exam. In this example, I'm doing it in Google Sheets, and Google Sheets does not have an unpivot command, so the way you do this is pretty convoluted. I'm not even going to describe it because it is completely irrelevant to the exam. Again, these sorts of implementation details for specific tools is not something you need to know. I had to go to Google and look up how to do this in Google Sheets. It's pretty twisted. But again, for most tools you'll be using as a data analyst, assuming it's not Google Sheets, there is an unpivot command you can use much more easily.